data analysis expression. So you can see that it was specifically built for data analysis. For it to even carry the name data analysis, okay, to analyze your data, isn't it? So now, DAX, also known as data analysis expression, is simply a formula language that is used in Power BI for creating calculated columns, calculated tables, or measures. Let me come over again. It is a formula language used in Power BI for creating calculated columns, calculated tables, or measures. So I know you might have some questions on what calculated columns, tables, and measures are. We're going to get there. Okay. Now, it consists of functions, constants, operators, even variables that can be used in a formula to calculate and return values based on the calculation. So I don't want to bore you. Okay, what are we really talking about here? Now, remember your Excel. If you want to compute, say, sum of sales, sum of a column, you just type equals to sum, open brackets, and you put the range you want to sum, close bracket, and press enter. Isn't it? Now, it is very similar to what you are doing here because it's also a formula. The difference now between that of Excel and that of Power BI is that, one, formulas in Power BI are kind of dynamic, more powerful, and that can perform some particular expressions that you can't necessarily easily do in Excel. That is one. Number two is that another difference between DAX and Power BI is that in Excel, all right, you have to just simply go into a cell and give the formula, isn't it? Here, you don't go into a cell and give the formula. Okay, your formula will usually start with the name of the formula or the name you want to give. Remember, we said it is used for creating calculated columns, calculated tables, or measures. So you have to name the column you are creating first, or you have to name the table you are creating with that DAX, or you have to name the measure first before you type equals to. Then when you type equals to, then you give the formula you want to use. All right. So, consists of functions, constants. Here we've said that already. All right. So basically, most of what you have in Excel and more. All right. So let's move on. Measures, calculated columns, and calculated tables. So let's start with measures. What are measures? Well, you know what? Let me start with calculated columns, and I'll move to measures. Now, when I say calculated columns, I don't mean anything big or special like that. Okay? You know, in Excel, in your sheet, in your spreadsheet, you can create a new column to do something. All right? That is how it is here as well. You create a new column. But the difference between that of Excel and Power BI is that in Excel, you can just create a new column. Okay, if you want to put a formula, you must create a new column first. You see that the column is there, empty. You will now put the formula on top in the first cell and replicate. Here, you are creating a new column as well, but oftentimes, it goes with the formula you want to use to generate data on that column. You want to sum, you want to add, you want to find the minimum, you want to find the maximum, and things like that. We've talked about aggregate functions before. in Excel, isn't it? So calculated columns are new columns that are created in the data. They are not just created in the data, they are created in the data that is in Power BI and do not store in the data original source. There are some people in this class that over time I've come to see that yes, they really grab what I've been saying. Okay. Many of you don't really pay attention to the key things I say in class. That's why you come back on the WhatsApp group chat and ask some questions that have already been answered in class. All right. So take note of this thing. Whenever you want to work with a data in Power BI, you do the cleaning and everything. You cannot extract that data out in Excel format again. All right. So Power BI does what? It simply makes a copy of the data and stores it in that Power BI file. All right. So it means it does not have anything to do with your data original source again, as long as you do not open the Power Query once you are done transforming. But anytime you go back to the Power Query editor, your file needs, or your data source needs to be where it was initially. All right. But as long as you finish your cleaning once and you load it into Power BI and you don't go back into the Power Query for that particular Power BI file, okay, your data source can be moved from its original position. It won't affect the file in Power BI. Why? Because Power BI has made a copy of that file. So now, whatever changes you make in the data in the Power BI model, it does not appear on the data original source. For instance, let's say I imported into Power BI a data that has 5 columns. Then in Power BI, I created 2 more columns for that data. I now saved it into, or loaded it into my Power BI desktop. Those 2 new columns will not appear in that original file where I got my data from. It will still remain 5 columns. It is only in Power BI that change is affected. So your calculated columns are created in the data in your Power BI desktop, and they do not store in the data original source. So it is usually created from 2 or more existing columns in the data set. So take note, they said usually, meaning it does not necessarily have to be created using 2 or more columns. But usually, more often than not, it is usually created from even one column, 1, 2, or more columns that are existing in the data set already. Okay. Now, another thing about calculated columns, this is one of the benefits why you need to be in class. The people that are not in class now, and some of them don't watch the video completely. What they do is that they skip steps. They fast forward the video. You're not in class, so then when you're watching the video, you now feel there are some parts you don't need. Someone entered into my DM asking some questions, and I'm like, have you watched the videos? Because those questions were things that I did step by step. Things I knew that I took my time slowly to explain in class. And I asked, are you sure you've watched the video? Okay, I'm going to watch the video now. Then I relay message again that I've gotten it, thank you. So there are some things that might not be in the slide that I will just mention in class that if you don't pay attention, you won't get it. All right. So please give me a minute. All right. Now, as I was saying, for your calculated columns, take note of this key thing. Your calculated columns are created and you can see them in your Power BI. You will see the columns in your Power BI. Okay. But if we come over to this one I wanted to show initially, measures. Now, measures are defined formulas used to create summarization or an aggregation of the data present in the data set. Okay? Defined formulas. Defined formulas. Meaning you are defining, you are giving a formula used to create summarization or an aggregation of the data present in the data set. Now, take note of something. It is stored as a source code in the model and only computed when used in the report. It takes up lesser space than columns and calculated columns. Now, for your columns, I said if you create a column using a formula, you will see the output immediately on your data view. But for measures, if you create a measure, what you are simply doing is that you are storing a formula for later use. The formula can be used to maybe, let's say you want to sum a column or find the average of a column or some other complex calculations. So if you are not ready to use the formula, what Power BI will do is to store it. So think of something like this. You have a paper. Let's say I have 2 papers. Okay? And then I give you a data set. That's okay. Analyze this data set. Perform sum of sales, average of sales, minimum of sales, and so on and so forth. Now, let's say in one paper, you start doing all the calculations. You fill the front, you fill the back, you ask for extra sheets. Okay? That is how calculated columns is. It calculates what you need immediately. Now, measures, on the other hand, will come in this form of, you have that paper. What it will simply do is write the formula on a paper for me. It's only the formula that will be on that paper. And then you store the paper somewhere. So when the person now asks, what is the answer to this question? Measure will simply do what? Use the formula to calculate it when you need it. Meaning if you don't need it at all, it won't stress itself calculating it. But for calculated columns, whether you need it or you don't need it, as far as you've told it calculate this, it will always be there. So calculated columns take up more space in your data set, on your data model in Power BI, than measures. So there are some further dynamic things you can do with measures. Okay? There are contexts to using measures and calculate and DAX. There are contexts to using DAX, rather. You can use DAX on row context, using it to create calculated columns, meaning it will calculate that formula for each row. And you will have the values in a column. Or as a filter context, which is measures, meaning it will calculate that formula in total, allowing you to now filter that formula by a particular category. But we'll see what I mean when we get into Power BI Desktop. Benjamin Matthew, please close or turn off your video. So, calculated tables, finally. So these are new tables that are created based on data that are already loaded into the data set. Okay, they are new tables. So there are new tables that are created based on the data that are already loaded in the data set. So you can use DAX formulas to create new columns on this table. So just like in Excel, if you want to create a new sheet, you simply right click or you click that plus button at the bottom to create a new sheet. Here, if you want to create a new table, you will use a formula to create that table, depending on what you want the table to do. Okay? And the formula you make use of is known as DAX. So in that table, if you now want to create new columns as well, you use DAX again to create the new columns. Right? So now, DAX has different categories, okay? Some of which include date and time functions, time intelligence functions, logical functions, information functions, mathematical functions, and table functions. Okay? So we will just touch on a few of them, all right? Date and time, few in date and time, few in time intelligence functions, few in logical functions, maybe one or two. All right? So let's get right into class. Okay, so I'm going to open up my Power BI desktop. All right, so I'm going to close this. Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. Join us in Las Vegas. So if you want to go to Las Vegas, you can register for this. You pay for your flight and everything. No? All right, so open up your Power BI. Now let us go ahead and load in the data we're going to use. So the one I'm going to load in is the Power BI DAX first. So I'm going to load in that data, Power BI DAX 1. Okay, so I need to know the data type of that data first, whether it's an Excel file or a PDF file or whatever. Okay, so it's a Microsoft Excel worksheet. Good. I'm going to go into Power BI. I'll say get data from Excel. Click on it. Then I'll locate the data. Where is the data stored in? I have to find that particular place. Good. This is it. I click on it and I click open. So just see it as in Excel. After we looked at some data cleaning techniques, isn't it? We now moved on to some functions in Excel Here we started doing our aggregate functions, VLOOKUP functions, match and index, and so on. So what we want to do here is the same thing. We want to now see how we use formulas in Power BI, so that you will not think it's something very special. Okay. So the data you want to get is this sheet 1. I'll tick the box. You can see what I did. I had to tick this box. There's someone that reached out to me that his load and transform button is not working. After I shouted and shouted and shouted that you need to tick this box first in class. So please always pay attention during these sessions, all right? So after ticking the box, I have these buttons activated, okay? So if I want to do cleaning, I can click on transform data. So what I'm going to do, let me click on transform data first. It takes me to my Power Query editor. Why? So let me do a quick recap. So what is the Power Query editor? For those of us that have been around in previous classes, what is the Power Query editor? If we don't type our answers on the chat box, we won't move on. No. So what is the Power Query editor? Someone said, beautiful. So it is used to transform, clean or transform and prepare your data. Most importantly, in your Power BI desktop. Can also be used in Excel as well, okay? But in Power BI desktop, whatever cleaning or transformation you want to do is done in your Power Query editor. So I like this definition, an application that we use to transform data. The Power Query editor is a feature in Power BI that allows for multiple methods of data cleaning. For cleaning and transforming data, that is where we transform and clean our data before loading to Power BI. Beautiful. Okay, very good, very good. So let's move on. Now, what do I want to do? I want to make sure my data quality is valid, 100% all true. I want to make sure I remove duplicates. And I want to make sure that I rename whatever needs renaming and change the data type if need be. Okay? So let's start with the data type. So for order date, the data type is a date, which is fine. For order ID, it is a number. Now, your identification column, whenever you have an identification column, it can either be a number or a text. You can change the data type to either number or text. Okay? Whenever you have an identification column, order ID, product ID, sales ID, employee ID, car ID, registration ID, transaction ID. Whenever it is an identification column, okay, you can either use number data type or text data type. All right, but the key thing is make sure it is uniform. So if you are using text for all the IDs, use text. If you are using number for all the IDs, use number. Okay, I personally like using text for my IDs. Okay, so I'll change this data type from number to text. I will add new step. I'll come here as well. I'll do the same thing because it's in an identification column. Beautiful. Do you see that? It doesn't change the value. Texts are usually formatted to the aligned to the left of the column, which doesn't really mean anything. Okay? Because I won't be using that column to calculate anything. I cannot say sum of product ID now. Although there are some funny people that do sum of product ID. I don't know what they achieve. I don't know the insights they generate from that kind of calculation. I've seen a dashboard like that had sum of product ID by, and I was like, sum of product ID? What do you mean? Okay, so selling price per unit. So let's change the data type for this selling price per unit. Because currently it is on what? Decimal number. So I'm going to change it to fixed decimal number. I'll click that. Okay, I'll do the same thing for this. To fixed decimal number, cost price per unit, or the cost per unit, and the selling price per unit. Meaning this is how much it took them to make the product. But this is how much they bought the products, the manufacturer, or the superstore, or the supermarket. This is how much he bought the product. Then this is how much he is selling the product. Okay? Then we have quantity. We have quantity. So quantity data type is number, which is fine. So I'm going to leave it like that. Now, take note. Okay, let's change the name of our query first. Over here, I have name. Okay, so I'm going to change it from sheet 1 over here on the right hand side. I'll change it from sheet 1 to let's call it supermarket table. Let's call it supermarket table and press enter. Okay, now I can simply create a new column to calculate, let's say, the sales, which is selling price times quantity, or calculate the cost, which is cost per unit times quantity, or calculate the profit. I can do that here in Power BI, in Power Query rather. Okay, I showed you how to create a new column in Power Query, isn't it? But those formulas you are using in Power Query there is not DAX. Okay, so now I will show you how to use DAX to do the same thing. But DAX is usually used in the Power BI desktop. So what we're going to do now that we're done with our transformation, okay, one more thing, move duplicates. So click anywhere, Control A, and I'll go to the top. I have remove rows, and I'll click remove duplicates. All right, so I will now close and apply. I'll come up to the top left corner where I have close and apply, and I'll do that. Do you see that? So now my data has loaded into Power BI desktop. How do I know? The canvas change from add data to your report to build visuals with your data. Meaning I now have data in my Power BI desktop. If I come to my data pane on the right-hand side, I can see the data I loaded, supermarket table. But where are the fields? Where are the columns in this data set? Oh, I can simply open up by clicking on this arrow to expand the data. And I have the respective fields here. Okay? Yes, I said DAX used in Power BI desktop. Okay? So, let's move on. Now, if I come over to my table view on the navigation pane, I can see my data in form of the table, which it is. Okay? So from here, I can create new column, new tables, or even new measures. Okay? I can also do so from my report view. If I come to my report view, if I come to where I have modeling, you see I have new column, new table, new measure. Okay? I like doing that on my table view, except if I want to create a measure. Now, from my table view, let's start off by creating new columns. Okay? Let's start off by creating new columns. All right, so we're going to look at some of these functions: date and time, time intelligence, logical functions. We'll look at maybe like two on each one of them. Okay? But before we look at those special functions, let's look at just calculating based on two columns without using a particular function. Just maybe addition of columns or subtraction of columns and things like that. Okay? So how do we do this? Let's say I want to create a new column called sales. Okay? The formula for sales is what? Selling price per unit times quantity. Okay? So what I will do is I will say new column. I'll come to the top here where I have new column. I'll click on new column. You see that the column is created, but it is blank. Now, in the formula bar, I have column equals. What this means is that you need to give a column name, the equal to sign, and then you now give the name of the formula. So I will first give the column name. I want to call this column sales, then equal to, then I will now give my. So the formula for sales is what? Selling price per unit. I will type it selling. Do you see that immediately I typed it brought out the name of that column? Now take note of another thing. You cannot call only the name of a column in Power BI desktop. What Power BI does is that it will call the name of the table first, then the name of the column will be in square brackets. Or if you type just the name of the column, it will suggest to you that is this what you are looking for? If it is, simply go ahead and click it. Okay? So you see this column, selling price per unit. This is how Power BI denotes it. The name of the table, which is supermarket table first, then the name of the column in the bracket. So, supermarket table, selling price per unit, then what? Times quantity, isn't it? You can see I'm not clicking on the column. Don't do that in Power BI text. Okay? So I'll do times quantity times the quantity column. So what will I do? I will type quantity out. Quantity. And you can see it gives me the column name by what? Denoting the table name first, then the column name in square brackets. I will click it. So this is the formula for calculating sales. What will I do? I'll press enter. So you can see immediately I press enter, it computes the sales for all the columns. Do you see that? It computes the sales for all the columns. I said columns, all the rows rather. All the rows. So you did not have to double click and drag or anything. No. It does it automatically. So this is for sales. So let us create another one and call it cost. Now this is cost per unit. Okay. So let us see the cost that they will incur if they want to produce these quantities, which is cost, isn't it? So I'm going to click new column again. New column. And I'm going to call this cost equals to. So remember, cost is the name of the column. All right. I should fix my mic closer. Hello, everyone. Is my voice not clear? All right. Thank you very much. So, for column or for cost, now, what do we do? All right. So, if you're not hearing me clearly, either you should increase your volume, okay, or work on your connection. All right. So, for cost, what do I do? Cost is simply what? Cost per unit times the quantity. Isn't it? So cost per unit, I'll click on it, times. Times is your asterisk key, not the letter X or your asterisk key. So times quantity. Quantity. Click on it. And then press enter. So you can see how Power BI or Power BI Desktop simply helps you create columns. So let's create one more column for total or for profit rather. Let's create one more column for profit. Okay, so how do I do that? New column. The title of the column is what? Profit equal to. So profit equal what? What will profit equal? Very good. Sales minus cost. So I'll type it there. Sales, which is this, minus costs. Now, which cost will I click here? Which cost will I click? Which cost will I click? Which one? Very good. The second one. Beautiful. Very good. So this one. So click on it and then I'll press enter. And that gives me my profit. Okay, so I have been able to create new columns for sales, cost, and profits. All right, now that is working with columns. You want to multiply columns, you want to subtract columns, and things like that. Okay, so let's say I want to calculate Let's move on to calculated tables. Let's see how we create calculated tables. Okay, let's see how we create calculated tables. All right, so to create a new table, now, how do I know the tables I have? On my data pane, this is my table, supermarket data, supermarket table. I can create a new table. Looking at the fact that I have just one table here, I can create a new table. In case there's an error, what it will simply give you is just error, 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 error. Okay, it won't tell you whether it's syntax error or something error. No, it will just give you error, 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 error. Let's look at this. Let's say I did not type this column name finish. Instead of cost, I just wrote cut and I press enter. Do you see that? It just gives you error, 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 error. Okay? Then it might give you an information beneath your formula here. It says column, COT, COT, in table, supermarket table, cannot be found or may not be used in this expression. All right? So let me correct it. All right, good. So now let's say I want to create a new table for my high sales. Where my sales are high. I can say I have some sales as low as $34. Some sales as low as $78. And I have some sales as high as $630. Okay? You see that? Now, let's say that I want to create a new table for my high-end sales. Okay? And I'll call it high-end sales. What can we do? I can use my calculated table to filter this data. Let's look at what we mean. I'm going to come over to either my home tab or table tools. Let's click on my home tab and then click on new table. Now, to create a new table, all right, you need a formula as well. So first and foremost, the name of the table first. Let's call it high-end sales equal to. Now, what formula do I want to use? So the first formula I'm going to take us through is a table function. Okay, so just looking at how we're touching each one of them. A table function. Okay, so what table functions do is that they return table, they create tables for you. Okay, table functions create tables for you. All right, so I want to create a table based off the table I already have in the data set, which is supermarket data, isn't it? How do I create this table? I'm going to use the table function filter. Why? Because I want to filter my supermarket table. I want a table where all my sales is greater than $500. Okay? I want a table where all my sales is greater than $500. So what I will do is I will say filter this function, the first one. I'll click on it. Now, whenever you're using a formula, okay, let's take a look at this formula, for instance. I'm going to treat it like as though I'm a newcomer. I don't really know how to use DAX formulas. I only have idea of Excel formulas. Okay, So what I will do is this. I'm going to read the arguments. Arguments are the things that go into the bracket of the formula. I'm going to read the formula and understand it. Now, after I say filter, open bracket, what is he asking for first? A table. Meaning, which table do you want to filter? So what will I type there? Very good. Very good. So not just supermarket. The name of the table is supermarket table. So I will type supermarket table. You see that? And it brings it out. I'll click it. That is the name of the table. And I'll press comma. So after table, what does it need? Filter expression. Filter expression. So what am I going to filter? What am I filtering on my supermarket table? I'm filtering the sales or the sales column. And what do I want? I want to make sure that the sales is greater than 500. So I will type it like that. Sales, which is this, greater than, I'll type that symbol, 500. Do you see that? Let me zoom in so you can see the formula very well. So you can zoom in Power BI desktop, or you can zoom in Power Query. Okay, no dollar sign. No dollar sign. All right. So after this, I'm going to close it. Close my brackets. And then go ahead and press enter. How to get greater than sign is on your keyboard. The greater than sign is on your keyboard. And you can see that it creates a table that is very similar to my supermarket table. But the beautiful thing here is that what? The sales column contains data that the sales is greater than $500. No sale in this column is less than 500. Do you see that? So I've been able to use my filter function, which is a table function, to create a new table by filtering my old table. That's why we say calculated tables are created based off the table that you have already in your data set. Okay? So let's look at what if I want to create columns using conditions. Okay? This is high-end sales. Now, let's go back to my supermarket table. So I'll show you how to create a calculator table. Okay? Now, let me show you logical functions, which is simply your if, and, or functions. Okay? So we know how to use the if, and function, if, or function. Isn't it? So the same idea applies here as well. All right, so how do I do that? Let's say I want to create a new column and say sales category. And that column will simply contain an expression that, okay, if the sales is between 0 and 500, say low-end sales, then if the sales is 500 and above, say high-end sales. Or if the sales is between 0 to 400, you can say low-end sales. If the sales is 400 up until 800, you can say medium sales or medium end sales. And then you can now say any other one is high end sales. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to start by creating a new column. All right, and I'm going to say sales category. That's the name I'm giving my column. Sales category equals to. So what is the formula I'm using? If. Very good. If. So I'm going to say if, open brackets. Now the logical test. If sale is less than 500, let's start with that. If sale is less than 500, I'll type sales. Click on it. So if this sales less than 500, comma, the result if true is what? Low end sales, isn't it? Now, can someone tell me how I will type that low end sales? Using your idea of Excel. In parentheses. Beautiful. Very good. So I'll open parentheses and say low end sales. I'll close my parentheses. I said parentheses, sorry, double quotes. Double quotes. Okay? You meant double quotes. Very good. For those that double quotes. Beautiful. Okay? Low end sales, then comma, results if false. What should you put? High end sales. Meaning, if this is less than 500, if it is true, say low end sales. But if it is not true, meaning it is 500 and above, then put high end sales. So I will type high end sales in double quotes. Close the double quotes, and finally close my brackets. So this will create a column for me. By the time I press enter.
But that may be medium. That may be medium since it's less than 800.
So you can see the sales category.
It's only the two categories.
Yes, so we're looking at two categories now. Okay, I'll show you how to work with, okay, let's say you have three categories. All right, now, I have sales category, low end sales, high end sales. The condition is if it is less than 500, you should simply put what? Low end. Isn't it? If it is not less than 500, meaning it is 500 and above, you should put high end. Okay, so I'm just dividing it into two. So it's either low end or high end. Okay, now we did this using the if condition. All right, that is a logical function. But if I want to use maybe more than two categories now, okay, yes, I know some of you might say our AND function or something like that. All right, you can use in Excel your ifs function, but in Power BI, your switch function. Switch. another logical function that I'm introducing you to now. So I'm going to start by saying new column, and I'll call this advanced sales category. Advanced sales category equal to. Now here, I want to divide it into 3 different categories: low end, medium sales, and high end. So if it is less than 400, put low end. So I will start from the low number. So the function I'm going to use is what?
Yes, sir.
Hey, who is that? Oludolapo, can you mute yourself, please? So I'm going to start with the switch function. Open bracket. Now the first expression is the sales less than 400. I will type sales, which is this one, less than 400, comma. What should I put? Oh, sorry. Expression, the first expression is true. So take note. After the switch function, the first expression you put there is true. Okay? This function, you select it. True. Open and close brackets, comma. Now, value 1 is the sales less than 400, comma. Result 1. So if the sales is less than 400, what should the result be? Put low end sales. So you put double quotes, low end sales. Close the double quotes, comma. Value 2 is the sales less than 800. Sales less than 800, comma. What should the result be? Put medium sales. Medium sales. Close the double quote, comma. Then finally, if the sales is now, let's say, greater than 800, or what you can simply do here is to simply say, I'm coming. Let me see. Hey, it's error. Sorry, I'm not done with the formula. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. All right. So after the first set, low end sales, the second set, medium sales. Now, if the sales does not fall within any of this category, it is not less than 400, it is not less than 800, simply put high-end sales. High-end sales. Close the double quotes, close my brackets, and press enter. So you see that I've been able to create 3 different categories now using the switch function here in my Power BI desktop. Isn't it? And in doing this, I've been able to introduce us to not only columns, calculated columns, but also calculated